Murray had met the Kenyan leader, Tom Mboya, in 1956. She picked him up from the airport to take him to Stranger's Home. She also met with Nyerere and other African nationalist leaders. Murray was a formidable intellectual who was also a poet and later became a priest in the Episcopal Church. But as an interracial woman and active resistor of Jim Crow, she faced many obstacles in her daily and her professional lives. She had keen personal sense of the sufferings wrought through racial oppression. Her grandmother had been born into slavery, and she herself had been brought up by her maternal grandparents in the bitter conditions of segregation. Another difficulty for Murray was that she was sexually attracted to women at a time when homosexuality was against the law in the US and generated prejudice and hatred. Recent interpretations of her archives reveals that she battled with gender dysphoria. At the time existed in the 1930s and 1940s, argues the Black feminist scholar Brittany Cooper. Murray might have identified as a trans man. Biographies published in 2016 and 2017 revealed that well into middle age, Murray tried to obtain hormone replacement therapy as a means of transitioning gender, but without success. The treatment scarcely existed before the mid-1960s, and even then it was seldom available to women who identified as men. Yet another factor that made Murray feel vulnerable was her political past. He had worked for a number of the organizations singled out as communist by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Because of this, when applying for a position at Cornell University, she decided to submit a 6-page memorandum detailing pertinent data on my background and organizational affiliations, which may be useful to you in the event the State Department requires a loyalty investigation of all prospective personnel. She stated that in each case, she had taken an anti-communist position. Murray wrote a family memoir in 1956 titled Proud Shoes. Its tone, argues Sarah Azaransky, in a study of Murray's life and work, is defiant of the insinuation that he had communist connections or that she was disloyal to the American government and to the ideals of American democracy. Yet, adds Azaransky, Murray's project can also be read as deeply apologetic. Instead of calling into question the state's use of suspicion to discredit people involved in freedom struggles, Murray went to great lengths to show that she did not deserve suspicion. In Ghana, Murray was miserable. She had never left the US before, and she was far away from the person whom she was closest to, Irene Barlow, known as Rain, who was 3 years younger than Murray. Tall, sophisticated, and white, observes Rosalind Rosenberg. In a biography of Murray, Barlow appeared to have little in common with Murray. In comparison with Barlow, Murray said she felt she was a vagabond, a pixie. But they had both suffered a hard scrabble life and shared the Episcopalian faith. They did not live together in the same household, but theirs was a profound union that gave Murray the guiding hand and spiritual embrace he had longed for. She wrote long and thoughtful letters to Rain from Ghana. Many aspects of life in Ghana were unbearable to Murray. Her house was still being built. and she had to live in a place with intolerable heat, noxious smells, and ubiquitous. I hate all these big grammars and all these big language. I mean words. Ubiquitous insects. I don't know. Is that ubi or ubiquitous or ubi, whatever? Yes. So she liaised with the U.S. Embassy under Ambassador Wilson C. Flake and socialized with L. Link, an African American on the staff who was known in Ghana for his superb and booming bass singing voice. But she did not fit easily into the large community of African Americans who had moved to Accra in support of Dr. Nkrummah and independence of Ghana. In 1960, Maida Springer was traveling through Africa in the course of her work for the AFL-CIO and stopped in Accra to see Murray. She was alarmed by what she found. Murray told her that she was living in a police state and wanted to leave. Springer defended Nkrummah, urging that allowances should be made at this moment of decolonization, but Murray disagreed. Springer later told a biographer, "My passionate feeling about Africa, she certainly did not share. She was too cool-headed and intellectually searching and was unwilling to make any compromises to make, for undemocratic practices in Africa." Murray believed that Nkrummah was becoming a dictator and feared she was at risk of arrest because she was spending time with members of the political opposition, including J.B. Danquah. She ensured that L. Ling, her closest contact at the U.S. Embassy, knew where she was whenever she left the capital city in case she needed to be rescued. As a precaution, she sent all her lecture notes to the CIA through Link as evidence against any charge that she was seeking to proselytize her students. It appears that Link was not simply a contact with the CIA, but also a CIA agent undercover of his work at the embassy. Murray spoke freely about her unhappiness to Lloyd Garrison Jr., a New York Times correspondent covering West Africa, who was the son of a mentor in the legal profession. The man she was in contact with at the U.S. Embassy, she told him, was a CIA agent. If she confided to Garrison that she was in contact with an African-American CIA agent, as Garrison reported to State Department officials, observes Kevin K. Gaines in Africans in Ghana. She could have been something more than an unwitting asset. At the very least, Murray championed American influence in Ghana with a steadfastness that made her serviceable to those engaged in gathering intelligence. This steadfastness led her in June 1960 to join the CIA-backed American Society of African Culture, AMSAC. Murray and Nkrummah were both extraordinary, courageous individuals with brilliant intellects and deep social concern. And in Accra, not far from each other's homes, they both listened frequently to much loved Western classical music, Beethoven's Panthetic, whatever. Anyway, let's go to the next stage, page, paragraph. So Murray's dislike for Nkrummah did not diminish, even once she had left Ghana. His attempts to gain hegemony or leadership over various countries failed. In my opinion, it was a real tragedy. That was Muriel. She stated in an interview in 1976 for the Southern Oral History Program collection. Perhaps it was unfortunate, she added, that he spent so many years in the United States and got this sense of what it must be to have a big country, a subcontinent, united, and the power of a subcontinent, I've often felt that this sojourn in the United States made a tremendous impact and contributed to this obsession of the United States of Africa. Lumumber said Murray was Nkrummah's protege. This was an accurate claim in the sense that Nkrummah acted as the younger man's mentor, but it was intended by Murray to suggest an excessive and unthinking allegiance on Lumumba's part. She also referred to a rumor that Nkrummah, almost bled the country of money to help Lumumba bring about a domination of the then Congo. Murray visited the Congo in mid-June 1960, shortly before independence, rather. So the reason for our visit was to secure information for the Ghanaian government on how safely to rescue a group of South Africans at risk of arrest for their role in protesting apartheid, writes Rosenberg, using Murray's diary as a source. The visit was dangerous and difficult, adds Rosenberg. Further detail on this visit have not been found. So Washington, D.C. was reasonably well disposed towards Nkrummah in 1958. Argues the historian Ebere Nwaubani, it had been irritated by his move towards an activist, Africa-centered foreign policy, and more so by its accompanying rhetoric. But the relationship between the two nations was sufficiently resilient to withstand this development. Our trade relation with Ghana, including access to raw materials produced in Ghana, are good. Ambassador Flake reported to Washington in October 1959. Our political relations with Ghana are friendly and fruitful. But the more Accra asserted itself throughout Africa, Nwaubani notes, the more the US worried about the general direction of Ghana's foreign policy. By 1960, it was increasingly alarmed by Lumumba's close relationship with the Ghanaian leader. In February 1960, Washington resolved to discourage, whenever possible, Ghana's current tendency to support extremist elements in neighboring African countries. The US planned the redefinition of its relationship with Ghana. One of America's concerns about Nkrummah was his continuing and active interest in atomic matters, including his profound opposition to atomic weapons testing in Africa. He was clear-sighted about the risk of atomic weapons for Africa, which he regarded as atomic imperialism. When France started in 1960 to test its atomic bombs in Sahara Desert, Nkrummah actively supported global campaigns against it, on the grounds that it contaminated the people of Africa, who had not even been consulted. In April 1960, a positive action conference for peace and security in Africa was held in Accra, where 250 delegates represented 25 African countries. Observers from non-African countries also took part. Speaking at the conference, Nkrummah lamented, "Winds carried the poisonous debris from the explosion to various parts of Africa, including Ghana. From the point of view of genetics, these atomic tests are extremely bad and can have the most disastrous effects. The French test last February resulted in a very substantial increase in radioactivity. This was proved," he said, "by the work of the British and Canadian scientists who were manning monitoring stations in Ghana." Though firmly opposed to atomic weapons, Nkrummah was enthusiastic about the possibility of atomic power to produce energy. The Ghanaian president believed that atomic power should be available to all countries, including those emerging from colonization. Since 1952, Scientists in Ghana had been working with isotopes, including experiments with radiostrontium on monkeys. I think I need a drink. Better. Anyway, let's continue. So they have been testing that said, okay, the Ghanaian president believed that atomic power should be available to all countries, and okay, let's continue rather. Ghana joined the IAEA on 28th of September 1960, 3 years after the foundation of the agency. In July 1957. That same year, Nkrummah announced the decision to establish the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission and to build an atomic reactor. It will be located on the outskirts of Accra in an area called Wabenya, which was swiftly dubbed Atomic Junction. At first, Nkrummah asked Canada, which had assisted India, for help with obtaining a reactor. But under pressure from the US, Canada declined the request. Nkrummah then turned to the Soviet Union, which promised to provide Ghana with a 2 megawatt research reactor for training a cadre of Ghanaian nuclear specialists. It also promised to provide experts, including physicists, geologists, and engineers. In February 1961, an agreement was signed between the two nations. A few years later, Nkrummah explained his thinking behind Ghana's plan for a reactor. We were fully aware, he said, that our motives might be misconstrued, but the setting up of an atomic reactor is the first practical step to building an atomic bomb. But Ghana's sole motive, he explained, was simply to enable the young nation to take every advantage of the decisive methods of research and development, which mark our modern world. It was essential to do this, he added, if we are to impart to our development, the acceleration, which is required to break even with more advanced economies. We have therefore been compelled to enter the field of atomic energy. Because this already promises to yield the greatest economic source of power since the beginning of man. With these words, Nkrummah echoed the spirit of Pesinoa's Atoms for Peace speech. But this stance was evidently not regarded by Washington as appropriate for Ghana. By contrast, the US had agreed to deliver the Trico atomic reactor to the Congo in 1958, when it had no reason to expect the Congo to achieve majority rule in the near future. And again, by contrast, it was in discussion with apartheid South Africa to supply enriched uranium for an atomic reactor, known as Safari, construction on which began in 1961 and continued until 1965, when it achieved criticality. It appears that from the point of view of the US government, a necessary qualification in Africa for access to a reactor was colonial occupation or white minority rule. The end of chapter 15. So we shall go to chapter 16 next time. And chapter 16 is called Things Fall Apart. So do you think we can still take calls? What time is it? So I think, we can take calls for another 40 minutes. Just how we chat around that. Or we can just leave it all for later this evening, okay? And I think that's what we're going to do. So there is going to be a replay that's going to be popping up on your screen next. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. All right? I'll see you later. Good afternoon.
Máyégún làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dódòdó.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Máyégún làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dódòdó.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Máyégún ti dé o ọ̀rẹ́ ará ìlú.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Lórí Facebook lórí YouTube.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Gbogbo bó ṣe ń lọ ni Máyégún já wa sí.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Àṣírí ọ̀jẹ̀lú kì í bò níbẹ̀ o.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Bó bá ṣe eré àní Máyégún máa wí.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Ó sì tún ṣe eré wàá gbọ́ níbẹ̀ o.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Máyégún Diary politico.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Godfatherism kò sí lọ́rọ̀ Máyégún.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Ẹ farabalẹ̀ sẹ́ o kẹgọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu o.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Àní Máyégún làwa mọ̀ tó dódòdó.
Máyégún Diary Nayibi #1.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé. Máyégún ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Lórí Facebook.
Máyégún ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Lórí YouTube.
Máyégún ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Bọ́ bàbá gbé wúrẹ́.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Ijó ìgbádìyẹ.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Presido bá rúfin o.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Kí gómìnà kówó jẹ.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Ọlọ́pàá tí ń gba rìbá.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Aṣòfin tí ń rúfin o.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Òpùrọ́ olóṣèlú.
Máyégún máa wí.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Máyégún ti dé.
Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran o.
Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dẹ̀rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
Wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ o, Máyégún ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀. Wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀, Máyégún ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀. Oníkan ṣáàtì ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, fáwọn ará ìlú tó gbé wọn débẹ̀ o.
Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe, ọmọ bá dẹ̀rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
Kì máa yí ṣe eré, ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣe ẹ̀fẹ̀. Kì máa yí ṣe eré, ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣe ẹ̀fẹ̀. Ẹni bá ti lè lẹ́bọ̀ lẹ́rù o, ọmọ bá dèrò kàṣàyè tú wọn síta.
Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Máyégún ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Ṣùgbọ́n ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
tẹnitẹni ọmọ máyégún ọ̀rẹ́ ara ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni mo fọlọ́hún sọ ẹ̀ bá kìlẹ́bù lóòótọ́ olódodo ìlú ọ̀tá ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni ìwọ ṣá máa ń ṣọ́ra kò sì mọ́ bẹ̀rù bọ́tà ń lè rí bóníṣègùn lé káwọn mọ̀mọ́ fi ṣera wọn ni ó ti dẹrùn tí wọn ò gbọ́dọ̀ sì mọ́ bẹ̀. èèpo ọ̀bọ̀lọmọ bá dérò tàjẹ́ ò gbọ́dọ̀ jẹ́ ó ti jọba lórí àbínú ẹni kò sì mọ́ fòyà àìsíwọ́lu ní.